You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast, and Happy New Year to those listening to it just after release, or maybe for the first 3 weeks we can get away with it, right? I'm excited today to bring you this episode with Connor Beaton. I tried my best Canadian accent, it probably didn't work. With Connor Beaton, a terrific, wonderful dude, someone who I'm friends with and met quite a few years ago through a good mutual friend of ours, and someone who I have just a shitload of respect for when it comes to being a human, being a man, and also the work he does as a men's coach and facilitator. He's someone I admire and look up to and enjoy his take on life and masculinity and facing your shit, and is someone who has a deeply curious mind and has created a wonderful and amazing business called Man Talks, which I first came across many years ago when I was starting up Beyond the Beers. Similar ideas in a sense, bringing me together into a room and having some conversations that go beneath the surface, really. And it was a great pleasure to bring Connor onto the show in this episode where we dive into him and his story, really, and kind of how he's got to where he's at, which, hey, that's a pretty common mode for a podcast. But Connor's got a very interesting story, because one of the things that we really explore in this episode is the idea of the shadow and shadow work, and kind of what the shadow is and how to understand it and how to start approaching, like, figuring that shit out, really. And so that's where we kind of go with Connor's story, is his exploration through a life of, duality for a lot of his life into his adult life, and coming unstuck and reaching a real rock bottom and needing to change, something needing to happen. Going from traveling around the world, being an opera singer, to living at the back of his car and, hitting this real low point. So we kind of cover all of that, and we also explore a question which I really wanted to explore with him, where he spoke about on a post on social media at some point recently, the idea that your masculinity and your manliness is not dependent on and cannot be tied to religion and patriotism. So we kind of explore that a little bit. We just dip our toes into the water of that small little topic there. There's so much in this episode. I'm really looking forward to you listening to it and getting into it. As always, love to know what you think of the episode, so please reach out, let me know, social medias, let me know that you're listening to it, what you think of it. Give us that feedback, which, of course, for me, please leave us a rating and review on Apple if that's where you listen. Make sure you click like, subscribe, and download. Now, it's a new year. If you fall into that new year, new you, let's make some New Year's resolutions way of approaching life for about a week or two at the start of the year, then I encourage you to take on a different approach. And that might be setting some intentions. After that, what these intentions ask of you, what they require, actual actions, who is on that journey with you, who is supporting you, who is guiding you, who is challenging you, who is keeping you accountable. Set yourself up for success. And if you don't have the tools or the resources or the know-how, like, what do? I don't know how to do it, and I don't know how to apply myself to it, because I always set up things like, yeah, I need to do that, and I know I want to do that, but I don't do it, or I sabotage myself, then that might be the time to reach out. Well, the Everyday Legends Academy is a comprehensive virtual group program. 6 months of diving deep into understanding who you are, who you want to be, and how do you become that. If that sounds like it might be a great decision for you this year, then reach out, let me know, and we can explore if grabbing a spot in the Everyday Legends Academy might be the perfect fit and the best investment of your life. Otherwise, let's get into the show. Please welcome Connor Beaton. Connor Beaton, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast, brother. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I'm excited to have this conversation because, there's something I want to talk to you about specifically, but also because, I love having conversations with wonderful men, guys that I consider to be, what I kind of call the everyday legends, but also yourself in particular. And I suspect that some of my audience will know who you are or know of your work, but also some might not. So I want to start with getting to know you a little bit. And the question I'm going to hit you with is this one. Who is Connor Beaton?
Oh, geez. There's the very existential and esoteric response that I want to have to that, which is just a construct of experiences that I happen to have gone through in this life form. But outside of that, ridiculous woo-woo answer, uh, um, Connor Beaton is should I reference myself in the third person? That
No, you
feels
can just
weird.
say me, I think.
Yeah, I'll just say I am, uh, I'm someone who has done a tremendous amount of self-exploration and discovery. I am I'm sort of a man of many things, a Renaissance man in some ways. I did construction to put myself through music school and have a degree in music and sang opera and traveled the world and realized that I disliked that and promptly had a complete self-destruction moment and and hit rock bottom and went through a complete identity change um, and moved into the space of studying Jungian psychology with a mentor of mine and learning about shadow work and men's work and I'm someone who has attempted to really live as much life as possible. I
Mm,
think that's the best way that I can say it. I've studied Buddhism, I've sang opera, I've done yoga, I've traveled the world, I've raced motorcycles, I think I've like really I've spent I think in the words of Francis Weller, who we both know, he said, I spent the first 36 years of my life performing me.
mm,
And I did that. I performed what I thought it meant to be me for a very long time. And I wore many different hats and put on many different forms of identity,
mm,
trying them on. And and just came to a place where I realized that most of it's kind of made up anyway, and that most people are just making it up as they go, and it's all sort of pretend in some ways. And so here I am.
kind of
I run
full
a
circle back to the first part of the answer.
yeah, full circle back to the first part of the answer. But who I am is somebody who runs a men's organization, and
Hmm.
I do a tremendous amount of work with men. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, so we do a lot of work with couples as well. And and I'm very fortunate to spend the majority of my time being a sort of Sherpa for men in their pain
Mm,
and supporting men on the journey of climbing that mountain of being able to witness the shit that they've been through,
mm,
whether it's the things that they were given, the pain that they were given through childhood, through abusive relationships, through failures, through financial loss, through death, through health issues, or the pain that they caused, right,
mm.
because of that. And so I feel very fortunate to be in that space. So that's my long rambling answer. Hopefully the rest of the answers are much more concise than that.
Beautiful. Look, it's a very open question which can take you anywhere, and that's why I love to ask it because you might have given a very different answer tomorrow or yesterday, right?
It's
Um,
very true.
so thank you for sharing that. And there's a few things in there that I'd love to touch on. One was, you said, look, I've spent the first 36 years of my life kind of playing me, and you said, I've tried on many hats. But there was also this reference to a rock bottom and some shit not going so well. So when you talk about like the trying on the hats and the kind of pretending to be me, so to speak, do you think the trying on the hats had a conscious awareness that I'm just going to, try on different things and see what's for me, or was it quite unconscious where it was more a mask almost?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I would say it was a little bit of both, but for a large part of it, it was me trying to wedge myself into the mainstream one-dimensional version of masculinity. And I grew up in a small town in northern Alberta in Canada, and it's synonymous with oil and big trucks and country music and shit
Yeah.
like that. And so it's the place that I grew up in kind of told me that that my worth as a man was in my ability to earn and perform. And so I went out and tried to do that. I went out and tried to find, how can I optimize my performance? How can I get the most out of myself? Because
Mm.
society has told me that I'm kind of worthless unless I'm able to perform.
And
And
was that a conscious kind of thing for you, really noticing that and connecting to, well, then therefore this is what I need to do?
not a conscious sense in that way. It was more of a drive and
Yeah.
determination to prove myself. I was very
Mm.
conscious that I was trying to prove myself. I felt uh, a bit insecure about who I was. I had, you know, uh, in some ways grown up in a bit of an abusive household. I was a child of divorce and separation, and grew up between two families, bouncing back and forth. And so I felt like a little bit of an orphan sometimes.
Mm.
And so I was very much trying to find my place in the world.
Mm.
And I was very much trying to find my resemblance of home and of depth. And so there was sort of this ego within me that was ferocious in its appetite for proving, proving
Mm.
to people that I was good enough, smart enough, strong enough, good looking enough. Could like, how lewd can I be on your show, by the
Go
way?
for it.
Yeah, can fuck long enough, like all of those parts.
Mm.
And so I really went full down that path, and I wasn't conscious that I was sort of trying to break free of this very narrow bandwidth version of masculinity. But certainly the environment that I grew up in contributed to that.
Mm.
And I really was trying to adhere to what I felt made me strong as a man. The
Mm.
environment that I grew up in as a young man was very much brought forward this ideology that you gain strength by suppressing your emotions,
Mm.
that you are stronger as a man the more you are capable and competent at repressing the hard parts of life and not talking about them, right? It's like the first rule of Fight Club, so you don't
Mm.
talk about Fight Club. The
Yeah.
first rule of being a man, as I say, I call it the one rule of men. It's, you don't talk about what it's like to be a man. You
Yeah.
don't talk about what it's like to be a man who's going through a divorce or has health issues, or in my case, I was unfaithful in my relationships. I felt completely out of control. There was addictions behind the scenes. I was out of control with pornography. I was, drinking every weekend and staying up late, and street racing my motorcycle, running from the cops. Like I was out of control,
Mm.
and I was in some ways waiting for this moment where life, God, the universe, something would intervene,
Yeah.
because there wasn't really anybody in my life that was intervening. And I figured out at a very young age, like most men do, is that no one was coming to intervene.
Mm.
No one was going to put me through an initiation process and kind of give me a psychological ass kicking.
But do you think there was a
And
part of you that was still hoping for it?
what's that?
Still hoping for someone to come in and give you the ass kicking, sit you down, stop you, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think there was for a period of time. I think there was certainly a part of me, the boy in me, the adolescent,
Mm.
the teenager in me was just like, kind of hoping that somebody would step in. But I ended up getting getting that ass kicking through through circumstances in my life, I, ended up having this career where I was traveling, and I had the motorcycle, and on paper it looked like things were going really well, but behind the scenes I was completely out of control. And my partner at the time ended up finding out that I was being unfaithful in the relationship, and I had been unfaithful in every relationship. I'd never really been monogamous. I had explored
Mm.
open relationships. Even then I would lie and cheat. And so, she found out. It sort of came to a halt. I still tried to lie about it. It didn't work. And I hid it from everyone that was around me, because I had so much shame about it. And I also
Mm.
had this pride that told me that I needed to sort this out on my own, that
Mm.
there was something broken and wrong with me. And, eventually I realized that that was not workable, that I had gotten there, and I was so stubborn that it took this, sort of like catastrophic life collapse to realize that, that there was a different way of doing things.
Mm.
And so I started to connect with other men in my life and tell them what had been going on. And there was a mentor who had been in my life, within my music career, who also happened to have a psychology background.
Right.
And so he and I started working together, and I spent the next 2+ years
And he had
mentoring him.
witnessed a lot of this, I'm guessing,
He had
or he hadn't
witnessed,
seen what was really going on.
yeah, he hadn't known what was really going on,
Right.
and so there was this sort of like moment of confession where I had to start to tell
Mm.
this man who was like in his late 70s, he was like a
Yeah.
grandfather figure to me, like what
Yeah.
had been going on. And I'm in my late 20s, and I'm like, listen, I'm a complete shit. and
How
I'm
was
with this
that moment?
uh humbling is the word. And I think surprising, and this is
Yeah.
very much what most men describe when they finally come to terms with these hidden parts of themselves. And
Mm.
so, I was very humbled in the fact that, like, he listened, he was able to receive, there was no judgment.
Mm.
He didn't bother giving me any advice. He was just very compassionate and understanding. And it was the kind of mature masculine presence that I
Mm.
had really wanted,
Mm.
and that I had really needed in my life, to just sort of be there and say, like, okay, yeah, you've been out of control. Tell me about it, and let me sit with you, and hear your story without needing to do anything. I think we live in this very,
Mm.
especially in Western culture, we live in this very heroic version of masculinity, right? Where it's like,
Mm.
oh, you have a problem, let me fix that for you, let me save you from that problem. And it's
Yeah.
like,
And here's
no,
all the tools that you can implement right now and fix this and make it go away.
right, right.
Yeah.
I feel like that's half of personal development. It's like very, like, clickbait culture has entered into personal development, where it's just
Yeah.
like, you can solve all your problems by downloading this PDF. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh no, that might
Um,
set you on the path.
but do you think part of you, because it sounds like you're in a very bad place, do you think part of you went to him with that as a desire? Like, hopefully he can give me some answers or fix some stuff, or it was just like,
Uh,
I need to empty. What was going on
yeah.
for you as you approached that conversation, both in the actual moment, but in the span of your life?
Well, so there was a moment before that where, I had decided, so I had lived out of the back of my car for a few weeks because I didn't want to tell anybody, and I just was so stubborn. And eventually I decided that I was going to connect with one of my friends and tell him what had been going on, and just sort of, I had lived with him before. And so, I sat down with him and told him what had happened. And by the end of the conversation, he ended up breaking down, and thanking me for being so open and honest with him. And he proceeded to tell me that he had tried to commit suicide a month and a half before. And I kind of was struck by the power of authenticity and
Mm.
vulnerability in that moment, realizing that, this was a guy that I knew almost better than anybody else in my life. I knew what kind of whiskey he liked to drink, what
Mm.
type of scotch he liked. I knew what type of shows he liked to watch, music he likes, like the whole thing. But I didn't know the deepest, most
Yeah.
profound parts of him, and he didn't know those about me. He didn't know that I had been unfaithful and out of control. And I didn't know that he had been so depressed that he had tried to hang himself.
Mm.
And so, for me, it was this real stark revelatory moment
Mm.
where I was like, how is it that my relationship with the people who mean the most to me in my life actually are so far apart?
Yeah.
How are we actually so far apart? And I realized and saw the distance between us in that moment. And I
Mm.
kind of vowed that I was like, I don't want to live my life with so much distance between me and the other men and the other women in my life and my family members. Like, I'm not interested in that. That doesn't work for me anymore. That has put me into a very lonely, isolated place. And again, I'm not too sure whose words these actually are, whether they're Francis Weller or somebody else, but isolation makes us impotent,
Mm.
right? And so that idea stuck with me because in many ways, I had become this sort of like shell of an individual who was very alone. And I
Mm.
think that's what this sort of one-dimensional version of masculinity that most of us are taught and indoctrinated into, this
Mm.
heroic version of masculinity that we're indoctrinated into, leaves us sort of stranded on this island
Mm.
where we feel like we have to save everybody else, but we are alone with our own shit. And so that
Yeah.
moment with my friend sort of predicated this conversation with like, okay, I'm just gonna open the doors a little bit to people in my life and let them in and tell them what's been going on, the trusted people, the people that had
Yeah.
earned my vulnerability. So that's why I ended up having the conversation with my mentor.
Yeah, beautiful. And then that clearly, by the sound of it, took you into a, a season of inquiry, by the
Mhm.
sound of it. So, where did that go next?
Yeah, I mean, I entered into an incubation period for
Yeah.
probably about 2+ years where, um, I devoured books.
Mm.
I read pretty much everything that Carl Jung had ever written. I read positive psychology books. I read relationship books. I read, all about Buddhism. I worked with my mentor for, as much and as often as I
This is the
could.
same guy.
Yeah, same
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had a background in Jungian psychology and neurolinguistics programming and Buddhism. And so I worked with him and I would help around his yard, and he had like a little farm with like asparagus and stuff like that. And so I would chop some trees and I would pay him for his time. And he would teach me about Jungian psychology and Taoism and Buddhism, different forms of Buddhisms and
Mm.
Buddhism, and NLP, um, and I got to practice with him, and so it was this wonderful like mentorship relationship. And then eventually, I moved out of that, and I knew I wanted to support men in some way. I knew I wanted to support other people that had been that maybe were going through the same thing that I had been
Mm.
going through, but I had no idea what that would look like. And I had no business experience really. And so I worked at Apple for a few years, moved my way up through that organization, found myself in a leadership position, working with people who had MBAs from some of the top business schools in the
Mm.
world, and really learned a lot. And then while I was there, I started Man Talks. I started my organization, and then I sort of away I went, I guess you could say.
Well, you went absolutely. Yeah, most definitely. And clearly in there was the deep learning, but I'm also suspecting there was, the implementation of that, right? So as we discussed before, like it's not all just give me some solutions and fix my shit, but at some point there is kind of a pragmatic, well, now I put this information into action, right? So
Mhm.
what did that look like for you across that period, getting to the point of I'm going to start this thing called Man Talks, and then we might explore that afterwards.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's so much work in there that it's like almost impossible to talk about it all. But what I would say is the implementation of it, was allowing myself to feel and become more present and aware and
Mm.
conscious of what was actually going on inside my body, underneath my thoughts.
Mm.
I had been again, caught up in this um, trap, this ideology, this dogma, this sort of rhetoric that tells men that we are only as good as we are able to think.
Mm,
And I had missed out on all of this really valuable information of what my body, my nervous system, my emotional body, my sexual body, like I was completely disconnected from all of those things. They ran me,
mm,
my sexual desire and drive ran me, and yet I was disconnected from it. I really didn't know it at all.
mm,
It's just every once in a while would pop up and tell me to go watch porn and jerk off, and so I would go. As a very diligent person, I would go do that. So it was really about me slowing down and getting to know my nervous system, my body, my emotions, my sexual drive, and a lot of practice.
mm,
Journaling in the morning, doing a morning routine, cold showers, breath work, meditation, yoga, um, having really hard conversations with my family, with my friends, copping up to shit that I had done wrong, where I'd
mm.
hurt people, owning my part in dysfunctional relationships. I mean, the list truly is a very long one. And I'm sure I'm sure for the men that are listening to this that are like maybe at that precipice, they're like, oh my God, that sounds like a lot of work. But it
Mm.
is, and I
Yeah.
think for people that
What's
for
the
the people
alternative?
that are yeah, yeah. I think for the people that sell you a bill of goods that tell you that it's easy to do the work and to start to put your life onto a course that is going to feel genuine, authentic, and powerful, it's like it takes grit and hard work and
Mm,
determination, and so it was a lot of implementation. It was a lot of having those hard conversations and staying with my emotions and
mm,
seeing the addict in me, that wanted to constantly numb out and distract and just
mm.
go watch porn for hours or play video game for hours or smoke weed and just get as high as possible so I didn't have to think about things, like, to continue to be with that painful part of me,
Mm,
and to realize that that pain was trying to communicate with me in a way, and it was trying to support me, it was trying to direct me, and that I had spent most of my life just trying to ignore it. And so I
yeah,
slowly had to shift into the modality of like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this thing, the shadow inside of me, and start to work with it rather than against it. And that sort of dictated a lot of my actions from there.
yeah, beautiful. So, what I'm getting in there as well is like almost completely reframing the relationship with yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and beginning, like, I always say a man's work begins in pain.
Mm,
And part of reframing that relationship with myself was giving myself permission to feel, understand, work with my own pain, and to reframe the narrative that I, as a man, either shouldn't have pain,
hmm,
aka sadness or grief or loneliness, uh, and reframe it into a space of it's okay for me to feel those ways, and now I can mature by learning how to be in life, be in relationship with people with that pain still there.
yeah,
It's like the Zen Buddhist saying, before enlightenment, I was depressed. After enlightenment, there was still depression, right? And so it's this
mm,
idea that even when as we start to do this work, it's not that we kill these parts of ourselves off or get rid of them. It's that we learn how to move through life with them more effectively, right? And so my coping mechanisms of porn and video games and drinking and women, those coping mechanisms just started to shift. They started to become more virtuous,
yeah,
and they started to turn into things like breath work and meditation
yeah,
and journaling and working out, and all those things that were more generative for my soul, for my body. Um, yeah, so hopefully that answered your question.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And then there was something you mentioned earlier on when you were in the midst of everything, which, I'm hearing maybe underneath the surface in a lot of this was the shame that
Mm.
you felt and had experienced. So, because I hear that in the pain, almost synonymous. So, how for you, how do you think you were able to, because there's a moment almost where we have to open the door and admit, like, oh, here's this stuff is really unpleasant. Like, how did you, and then perhaps, knowing what you know now, how does one actually start to explore that when I realize I've been keeping that maybe well beyond arm's length for a long time?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so just a few things about shame. Like number one, shame is a suppressive emotion. So it functions almost the same as alcohol, right? When you drink alcohol, alcohol suppresses what you're experiencing. It's a numbing agent. And so shame is very much the same way. The amount of work that I've done now and with most men, shame is the hardest thing for them to identify because
Mm,
it's the thing that they least want to feel. And so I had to really start to come into contact with like how much shame I had built up over the years. It was a tremendous amount of it. And um and I did that by having some of those conversations, by starting to lean into and realizing like this has isolated me, this has left me alone. This has started to sabotage my life. This has caused me to destroy relationships and sabotage my career. And I mean, it was really behind the curtain of a lot of the shit that I had been doing. And so coming to the realization that hiding and cutting myself off from experiencing my shame and not talking about it was incredibly detrimental. And I couldn't
mm,
see what was on the other side of that, right?
yeah,
Like
of
I didn't
course.
know what was going to happen when I started to talk about these things. I just knew that I had gotten myself into such a dark position, in such a rock bottom position, that I really had no other choice.
Yeah.
And the catch is that not all of us need to find ourselves in that place. We can realize before we hit rock bottom that there is a different way of operating. And
Yeah.
for some of us, we need to go through it because we're stubborn, and that's just the karma or life lesson that we seem to be served up and
Yeah.
this go around. um but it was really a matter of coming into contact with like, I don't know what's going to happen. I just know
Mm,
I can't fucking do this anymore. I can't do it anymore.
yeah.
And for some of us, we just need to come to that realization of like, when is enough enough? When
Yeah.
are you going to cut yourself off from your anger or your sadness or the intimacy that you're deeply craving in your relationship? Like, when is enough enough? And for me, again, circumstances kind of provided that for me.
Yeah.
But since then, I've had to continue to return to, that's enough. I'm not going to continue to allow myself to self-destruct in that way. And so building that relationship with shame has been very important.
Yeah. Beautiful. And what I'm suspecting in there as well was there was a I suppose a confrontation perhaps with all of that old belief system that you had, taken on board over the years around what it is to be a man. As you said, like, I need to be able to fix everything, and being a man means shutting off that emotional side of me. Was that something that became very conscious for you? Was that perhaps a lesson that came from your mentor? Like, how did, because that was obviously your entire upbringing, right? That created the pathway that you kind of went on.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I during that time I found a therapist. I did therapy. I had my mentor. I had many different spaces that were reflecting back to me. Um, continue to move in that different direction. To
Mm,
not
mm,
close, to not shut down, to not self-destruct, but to continue to move in this other direction. And then there was the other part where I started to become conscious of it,
mm,
that um, there was a different experience of moving in this other direction. That when I started to open up and be authentic and be real with people about what I've been going through or what my experience was, or to speak my needs in a relationship or whatever the case may be, there was a freedom in there that I had been seeking the whole time.
mm,
And the masculine within us deeply craves freedom, but we think that it needs to, I thought that needed to come in this way that was like, no one could tell me what to do, and I
yeah.
was going to do whatever the fuck I wanted, and I wasn't going to tell people, if I didn't want to, or like whatever the case may be. But that's how I perceived freedom. It
Mm,
was just like this ultimate form of, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. And it wasn't freedom. It was a trap, right?
Mm.
But no, again, nobody tells us that as men. It's an illusion. And so I had to start to learn what real mature freedom actually was. And I started to come into the conscious contact with the understanding that, that there's freedom in ownership,
Mm.
of ownership in our actions, in revealing where we've been out of integrity, where we've been out of alignment. There is a tremendous amount of freedom to that. There is freedom in being present, deeply present to our own pain, to our own anger, to our own sadness, to our own
Mm.
grieving, to our own loneliness. There is a tremendous amount of freedom in that. We become, as men, impotent and caged and very domesticated when we ignore all of that rich experience within
Mm.
ourselves as men. It's a tremendous part of existence that we cut ourselves off from, and we live from the neck up. We live in both of our heads, I
Mm.
guess is another way of saying it, right?
Yeah.
But for most of the time, we live from the neck up, right? And we're just caught in our rational mind. And so I'm just gonna share this quote because it comes to mind. But Einstein had this
Hmm.
beautiful saying where he said, "The rational mind is a faithful servant, and the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. And we've created a culture that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." And that quote really stuck with me because I
Mm.
realized that I had over-indexed the rational mind and put so much trust in it, and it led me so astray
Yeah. Well, it's
because
a
it's
trap,
so,
right? Because it
yeah.
rationalizes its own importance, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. It rationalizes its own importance, and it becomes a puppet for the shadow.
Mm.
And our shadow learns very quickly to manipulate us through rational means. And so when you look at anything that you've done in your life where you're like, well, that was fucking stupid, or I was completely out of integrity, I shouldn't have done those things. Somewhere along the line, you rationalized it, right? You
Yeah.
rationalized the infidelity. You rationalized the cheating or the lying or whatever it is.
Mm.
And so there was this moment where I started to cultivate this deeper trust, and presence and awareness with a different kind of intelligence that started to pull me in a different direction, which was very powerful.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that you shared that quote because as soon as you started speaking, I was like, "Oh yeah, that Einstein quote," and then you shared it. Um, so you've mentioned a few times, the shadow will. So can you take us into this a little bit? It's a big subject, but for a dude who's listening who's like, I can't, maybe I've heard about this stuff before, or I saw a post or one of your posts about it. You have a beautiful series on Instagram around the shadow work. So can you kind of start by explaining like what is the idea of the shadow and how does that play out for us?
Yeah. So the shadow is a concept that is it's everywhere. It's in fairy tales, it's in mythology, it's in our movies. But it came into psychology through Carl Jung in the 20th century. And the shadow is an archetype. It's a part of you psychologically that resides in your unconscious mind. And it's built and created when we deny or disown or reject certain parts of ourselves. So, or we have parts of ourselves denied, disowned, and rejected by other people. So you can think about, like, let's just say you grew up in maybe a somewhat abusive household where a father or a mother was hypercritical. Maybe they called you stupid. So a part of your shadow will start to pick up on, and again, a lot of your pain will go into the shadow, right? So the
Mm.
shadow becomes this sort of like, um, I call it the hurt locker, right?
Mm.
It's this part of our unconscious mind where we just shove all of our pain. We're like, I don't
Mm.
want to feel that. I'm going to put it in the shadow.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about that. I'm going to put it in the shadow. So we put our insecurities there. We put our worries there that we don't want people to know about. We stuff in the rejection that we felt from
Mm.
partners and relationships, sexual rejection, embarrassment. All of those things, excuse me, go into the shadow.
And the
And
shame, I'm
so
guessing from what you were sharing before.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So shame goes in there as well. And so it starts to take on a bit of a life of its own, right? Again, as I'm just going to refer to Francis Weller, but as Francis Weller says, your pain has its own intelligence.
Yeah.
And this is very true. Your shadow has its own intelligence. And Jung said that when our shadow, when our pain is not embodied in our conscious mind, the more that we reject it, the blacker and denser it becomes, the more powerful it becomes,
Mm.
and it eventually becomes the unconscious snag that thwarts our best intentions. So, what this means is that the more that we reject and suppress these parts of ourselves, the
Mm.
more power, the more energy, the more potency that they actually have to sabotage us, right? And so we then end up sabotaging our relationships
Mm.
because we are carrying around this wound that I'm not good enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not, whatever enough. And that part of us, when we don't tend to it, begins to sabotage us actively.
Mm.
And then we wonder why we can't get our habits together, or we can't build the intimacy that we want. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll just pause there. I just sort of outlined what it is and how it shows up. And I think I said a lot about it. And
Yeah. No,
maybe
that
I'll
was
just
beautiful.
pause.
And because what I'm getting in that as well is it 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 feeds itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it does the sabotaging, which kind of proves the point that I have spinning around in my internal narrative, and so therefore I do more rejection, more shame, and bang, it keeps feeding itself, right? And so, where my mind's gone instantly is maybe not a rock bottom, but it takes us towards that path where potentially, maybe, hopefully, one day there has to be some kind of a shift because it just is going in one direction unless tended to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So the question there is, how do we tend to it? Or
I was just sharing, but
okay.
but then, but then,
Mike's like, no,
beautiful
I was just
question, beautiful
yeah.
question.
I was
So
like, well,
then,
that's
yeah, so I'm hearing this and I'm like, fuck, I know I do that, and
Mm,
beyond the terminologies and Jung and etc., I sabotage my things in my life. I know I should and want to do this stuff, and I don't do it. And I know there's justifications, that thing that Connor was talking about. Yeah. So what do I actually start to do?
mm. Yeah, I mean, I've the one of the first components that we need to come into contact with in the shadow is, what are we avoiding,
Hmm.
what are we rejecting, and what are we projecting?
Right.
So this is sort of like the foundation. So we can very simply, because men often want tactical things. They're just like,
Hmm.
okay, learn about the shadow. I know what it is. I know it's fucking my life up. What do I do? So the tactical answer is we start to look into, let's just use the container of our relationship, because our shadow comes out very strongly in our relationship. So you can look at your relationship and you can start to say, what am I avoiding? What conversations am I avoiding? What boundaries am I avoiding? What uncomfortable truths am I avoiding? What am I rejecting about myself? What am I rejecting about my partner? And then what am I putting? Sorry, one sec. And then you can ask, what am I putting onto them? Right? What am I projecting
Mm.
onto them? Am I making them responsible for my anger? Am I emotionally offloading what I'm feeling onto them? Which is, again, it's a very common thing. It's like, I don't know how to deal with my emotions, so I
Mm.
make my partner deal with them. So you can
Yeah.
start to look at your relationship and say, okay, what's one thing that I'm avoiding that I'm going to take action on this week? Maybe you've been avoiding talking about the kind of sex that you want to be exploring. Maybe you're avoiding talking about how your partner didn't text you back and you feel hurt about it. Maybe you're avoiding admitting that you have felt disconnected or lonely because of whatever stigma that might carry. And so you start to break free from that,
Mm.
and you start to take action on it. You start to have those conversations or set those boundaries or own and admit that you have maybe been withholding. You've been withholding love, you've been withholding connection, and you start to take ownership over those parts. So that's at a foundational level,
Mm.
the first part. The second part is you start to look into your reactivity. So your reactivity is like the neon sign that's like pointing towards your shadow and saying like, hey, it's in charge. And I don't know what kind of sayings there are out in Australia, but in the West here, what we say, or New Zealand as well, what we say out here is like, we get into an argument with a partner and we say, oh, I lost it,
Mm,
or like, I lost my cool, I lost my temper. And the question is, well, what did you lose? You lost your conscious ability to respond, and you reacted,
mm,
right? You reacted from a place of aggression. So that is a really clear sign that reactivity, your shadow, is in play, and that you're probably hurting in some way, and you're not communicating the hurt, you're not dealing with the hurt, you're just reacting and becoming defensive or attacking. So what we need to do then is to come into contact with, like, what does our reactivity look like? When do I get reactive? What sets me off? What like really triggers me?
mm,
And to start to go behind that anger, because the anger is often it's a secondary emotion, usually. But B, anger is usually a sort of like guard or protector of our loneliness, of our sadness, of our grief, of some of these heavier
mm.
emotions. And as men, we can be slaves to those emotions if we don't allow ourselves to feel them. And we can become very reactive, right? So a lot of men are very, well, I won't go down that path.
Reactive,
I'll
but
take
also
this path.
I can get in there. There's so that might look outward or inward, right? Like an immense depression of those things, and some kind of internal war. Let's call it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, we can get. There's a few different kinds of anger that might be good to talk about when it comes to the shadow. So
Please.
some men will have an explosive kind of anger, right, where their anger is very externalized and
Mm,
it comes out in yelling and attacking. Other men have implosive anger, where it's very much like repressed and bottled in. Usually, a good sign that you have implosive anger is that you have a very hostile inner critic. So your inner dialogue is almost like abusive, like you talk
mm,
shit to yourself constantly. And those are sort of the two dualities that we see within reactivity. We'll either shut down, stonewall, judge the other person, or will become explosive. And where we want to move is into a form of conscious, clean anger, where we can start to feel our anger, and not need to react from it, but be able to respond while we're experiencing it. For most men, anger, we feel anger in the body first, and
mm.
then the anger floods up into our head. A good sign that you are unconscious is that you are feeling all that anger in the head. And when that happens, we've generally lost the game. If we can't keep the anger in the body and out of the head, it'll flood our rational thoughts and we'll act and respond and communicate from just a completely unconscious place.
Mm.
So we need to work and start to feel into, like, what's the quality of my anger? What is my anger at, like, a 3 or a 4? And what does it feel like when it's at a 7 or an 8? And when do I go unconscious on that spectrum? So
Mm.
starting to play around with noticing um, when the anger has turned into aggression and sort of taken over.
So then, what does this idea of the clean anger actually start to look like and feel like? I'm getting more in the body as opposed to the head. What does that then look like?
Externally in the conversation.
Well, if someone's to go, okay, man, I do the explosive or the implosive. How do I shift that? What does that even look like in terms of expression?
Yeah. So a lot of this is about reconditioning our nervous system. So when I say bring your anger down into the body, a huge part of that is about coming back to your breath. And so, a lot of the research, whether it's, through a great book like The Body Keeps the Score, or there's a great book by James Nestor, and a lot of the research is coming out about how our body stores emotions. Um, our nervous system, depending on, again, how you grew up, is primed to explode or implode, and we have to fight against that reactive nature. And so how we do this is we start to come back to our breath. So we
Mm,
become conscious and aware of, like, okay, feeling pretty angry, feeling pretty pissed off, maybe I should take a moment. So maybe
mm,
that's a moment where you, like, what I used to do is I called it the fire meditation, where when I would feel like I had sort of flipped into that space of like, okay, I'm unconscious, there's a lot of anger here, I know I'm not communicating from a healthy place, I would call time out, I would pause, I would go sit down, and that's when I would force myself to go into meditation and just
Mm,
breathe and just allow myself to bring my consciousness lower into the body, like as low as humanly possible, to down into the pelvic floor, into my heart, and to allow some of that anger to sort of circulate through the body rather
mm,
than to get so trapped in my head. Because again, when the anger is trapped in your head, all that's happened is that your nervous system has completely tripped and gone into the sympathetic nervous system, which is
mm,
responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. And from that place, we cannot consciously communicate
mm,
because our body is in a fight response, it's in a flee response. So we have to start to condition ourselves to move out of that nervous system response and into the parasympathetic. The fastest way to do it is breath work. So, what men can practice, because again, we all love tactical things, what men can practice is something as simple as box breathing. So, when you start to feel yourself really escalating in anger and you feel like you're boiling and that anger is like up in your head, you can go and sit down for 3 to 5 minutes and you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And you just do that box breath. And it is clinically, scientifically proven to reset your central nervous system.
mm,
So it'll move you out of that sympathetic fight, flight, freeze response and into a calm parasympathetic nervous system response. And so what we have to do is we have to start to condition ourselves to feel the difference between when I'm being reactive and I'm just launching and becoming defensive or attacking,
mm, yeah.
and when I'm able to actually be conscious and feel the anger in my body, but still communicate from a place of compassion, still listen to my partner or somebody else from a place of, okay, I feel angry, but I can hear your pain. I can hear your
Mm,
sadness. I can hear that you're frustrated. And it's in that, people talk about holding space. That's what holding space is.
yeah. Yeah, and so what I'm also hearing there in the shift, right, from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic is there's the creation of space.
Mhm.
And so in that space, you're able to kind of hold your anger and also be present to the conversation and communicate in a different way. And I suppose in that, there's a connection I'm making here, which is, and I can hold space, but I have to
Yes,
create the space
that's
first.
right.
And if I
That's right.
narrow and go into fight, flight, freeze into my head, there's no space there.
Yeah, once you've crossed that threshold, and this is the everyone needs to sort of train themselves, and this is just developing a skill set,
Yeah.
right? Most men have not been taught the skill of self-regulation.
Mm,
Okay, like I cannot stress that enough. Most men have not been taught the skill of self-regulation. They've been taught the skill of self-repression, right? Repressing the emotions. And so
mm,
we have to learn this new skill set of what does self-regulation actually look like. Well, it looks like you interrupting the pattern and starting to regulate your nervous system through breathing, through postural alignment, um, through yoga, through exercise, through movement.
mm,
All of those things are going to shift the body and allow us to get back into the body and out of the head where we're stuck. Because, like you said, when we're in that sympathetic nervous system, when we're in our head, we are not communicating from a spacious place. We are communicating from attack oriented place. And you'll probably hear your partner say things like, you don't understand me. You're not
mm.
hearing me.
You're not
You know,
hearing me. Yeah.
you're not listening,
Yeah.
and we're like, I am fucking listening. I'm not angry.
Yeah.
It's like you're
Yeah.
losing the game. So
And what
yeah,
I'm also hearing in there as well is straight back to that Einstein quote of like, I've all of a sudden just only prioritize the rational mind. And so I'm missing the messages that my body essentially is sending me.
yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of us men we have not been taught to trust our bodies.
Mm,
We've been taught to trust our bodies to be strong and to lift heavy shit, but we haven't been taught to trust the wisdom of our bodies when it comes to things like emotions,
mm,
and things like sexual drive and desire, to be able to like really be present to our own sexual arousal. most of us are so numbed out because we've just been watching hours of porn, and our sexual desire has been very externalized.
Mm.
So we have to start to repair that trust with the body of like, maybe this is uncomfortable for some people listening, but it's like, what is it like for you to masturbate without porn, without any fantasy, with
Mm.
just the physical sensation of you pleasuring yourself? For most men, when I ask them, like, when was the last time you masturbated without porn? Or when was the last time you masturbated without like a heavy eroticized fantasy?
Mm.
It's like, I don't even know, like maybe
Mm.
never.
Yeah.
And so we have so many different barriers of numbing out.
Mm.
And I've said this to a few men before, but like, numbing out is not an absent feeling of emotions. It's a fullness. It's a type of overwhelm. So
Mm.
when we are numb, it's often not because we're empty. It's often because we're so goddamn full
Yeah.
that there's no more room for anything else, right? There's no more room for anything else. And so again, we have to find these disciplines where we can start to empty some and create some space within us, whether it's breath work, holotropic breath work, or meditation, or a yoga, or something where we can start to create more spaciousness within our body and repair that trust and repair that relationship with our body.
Yeah, beautiful. Because there's a line that I've heard many times, which comes to me in that, and that is, "I can't feel anything."
Yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps it's actually there's so much that is in there that you just haven't allowed yourself to feel.
Yeah. There's a lot of emotionally constipated men, where it's just like we're just fucking backed up, and I did the
Yeah,
same. I mean, I did the same thing, right? If you
yeah,
listen to my story, if you go back and listen to it, I had just been backing up my emotions and numbing
yeah.
out. And I was just so full, I was full of loneliness and shame and regrets and sadness and
Mm.
anger and frustration. I mean, it was just a torrent.
Mm.
And so, to create space for ourselves to feel some of that is really what a lot of men are being asked to do,
Mm.
through by themselves, by the women in their lives. It's like, if you want to hold space for your partner, you have to have done that for yourself first.
Yeah.
You cannot listen to your partner if you haven't listened to yourself. And that's where most
Mm.
men are failing in their relationships, is that they are failing themselves first, and
Mm.
then they're failing their partner. So we need a different breed of men that are capable of leading themselves first, leading themselves into their emotions, into their pain, into their desires, into their arousal, into all these different layers of themselves, so that they can lead in the relationship. And that's what women are really craving from men.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. And back to I think something we mentioned earlier, which is essentially developing this relationship to self, which is to reference the immediate, create space. And where that takes me, because I'm very aware of the time, and so I definitely want to touch on this because we are talking about men, and by default we're talking about masculinity. There's lessons that you learned as a kid in northern Alberta, etc. And there's something that I see as a Kiwi who lives in Australia. So I'm in this side of the world where I'm like you. That's the way I equate it, and a Canadian living in the US. And I see it from this side of the world in terms of the US more specifically. And it's something that we've spoken about briefly, but you did a post about recently on social media. And it was the idea that religion and patriotism have nothing to do with your masculinity or manliness. So what I would love to do is explore that a little bit. What did you mean by that?
What I meant in the simplest form is that we have conflated and attached and outsourced our masculinity. We've outsourced our masculinity to external structures,
Mm.
external frameworks, external ideologies. And we have allowed them, these external structures and frameworks, to dictate what masculinity is. And whenever we do that, if you pay attention and if you just look at these structures and these frameworks, like certain religions, most religions, like political parties, like national and patriotic endeavors, what they need from the masculine is for the masculine to be one dimensional, for the masculine to be obedient,
Mm,
and for the masculine to serve their cause. Everything, most things in our world are propagated and built through the vehicle of the masculine. So the masculine is a very potent and powerful resource that organizations,
mm,
corporations, politicians, religions, they fight for. They there is a war for your masculine essence, because when certain organizations can capture your masculine attention, your
mm,
masculine consciousness, it creates movement, it creates motion, right? It
mm,
creates, it's a force that allows them to propel themselves. And so in many ways, um, there is an incentive for these external structures to vie for your masculine energy, to vie for your masculine power, to say you should fight for this, you know, this is the
yeah.
right thing to do as a man. It's like, well, who said? Why?
Mm,
You know, like why do you need to march through the streets for that cause? Why do you need to burn down, you know, those buildings for that cause? Why do you need to fight for that politician? Who said you need to wave that flag? Why? You just happen to be born in that country, by the
mm,
way, right? You just happen to be born there. You didn't even choose that. You didn't choose to be born into that country, into that religion, into that family. You didn't choose that. You just happened to be born there.
mm,
So why do you need to give your masculine essence, your life force to that thing? But we don't question that, right?
mm,
We're just it's hard to unplug from the matrix in that sense, and actually to step back and create separation and say, do I really want to give all of my life to that? And so the reason why I said your, you know, your religion and your nationalistic and patriotic beliefs don't have anything to do with your quality or quantity or value of masculinity, is that your masculinity is completely independent of those things.
mm,
But for most people, how they have valued their masculinity is by those things, right? That's the
yeah.
culture that we've created. And that culture is a byproduct of being underneath um, the sort of guise of this heroic archetype, right? That we need,
Mm,
that we are stronger if we are a hero. And that heroic archetype very much aligns with you know, the savior and certain religions and certain patriotic beliefs, you know,
mm,
especially here in America. I mean, good
yeah.
Lord, right? I mean, most Americans in America think that they're the savior of the world, and they still haven't woken up to the fact that most of the world hates them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you've become the villain.
Yeah.
You're the bad guy in the story, right? I think as Batman once said. And
Yeah.
so we, you know, we as men are being asked to uncouple and um it's like we've put our masculinity into a codependent relationship with religion and with patriotism, and
Yeah.
we need to fucking stop that. You know,
Yeah.
we need to just step back and reclaim our masculinity and say, just for a little while, I'm going to question why I'm giving so much of my time and my effort and my life force and my masculine power to these infrastructures. What are they actually serving? And does
Mm,
that actually serve what my masculine essence is desiring in this lifetime? You know, is it what the world really needs right now for me
yeah.
to outsource this masculine essence? Or is there a way for me to reclaim it and be of higher service to my community, to my family, to my
Mm,
friends who maybe need you more? And so, again, this is in a way a sort of like reclamation of the masculine. And from there, from that sort of clean space where we have reclaimed our masculinity in a way where it's not being outsourced to a woman's validation,
mm,
to a religion's validation, to a politician's validation, where we have sort of found ourselves in this space where we are free of those things. We can start to say,
mm,
okay, now where do I want to pour myself into?
yeah.
Where do I want to find purpose? Where will I like derive deep meaning from? And
Mm,
how can I be of contribution in the world from this place? but not until we have let go of all of those um, addictions
Mm.
and indoctrinations can we actually make a choice from free will. Can we actually make a choice from a free space?
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think there's so much in there because there's this other thing that comes up. You said about like the validation from women and the church, and then also potentially like my job and how much money I have. Like I'm almost attached to, I suppose, in one simple sense, capitalism equals my masculinity as well, and my ability to perform in that
Yes.
arena. And it's something that I recall you mentioning in your post about it as well, is that you get to be religious, you get to be patriotic, but it doesn't mean anything to do with your masculinity. Potentially, the way we're looking at it is that's the way you see your ability to perform masculinity, which is very different to your masculine essence and your life force, as you're sharing there. Because of course, there's other countries in the world, and this is one of the points of view that I have. There's obviously religion everywhere. Um, there is patriotism everywhere, but an American sense, and that very what I see is like almost a misguided um, application of the masculine, is such a narrow focus to, well, this is the way,
Mm,
and I can't be an American patriot and apply my masculinity in the way that a lot do in that place. So automatically for me, it gives the opportunity to question it. And like you
mhm,
say, how can I detach my masculine from those things, institutions, etc., indoctrinations, and a term that we were exploring before, come back to like self leadership and self governance,
mhm,
because in that there is so much power, as you said, the building, right? Those organizations want to take almost that
mhm.
masculine energy and life force of yours for their own benefit and means and growth. Is that essentially the point that you're making at the start there? And so that's something that we can claim back for ourselves, bring back to our lives, our family, our community.
Hmm. Yeah, in many ways, we again those external structures, they need our force,
Mm,
right, in order to function, in order to thrive, etc. And so they have a vested interest in keeping your masculine consciousness, your masculine energy within those infrastructures. And it doesn't mean that you can't pour yourself into whatever religion
mm,
that you desire. It doesn't mean that you can't vote a certain way. None of those things. But if we have never questioned why we have those rights, most people will be born into a Christian family that votes Republican or Democrat, or whatever system
mm,
they have in whatever part of the world you live in, and never question whether that's really what is best for them. So
mm,
it's a very myopic point of view, right? It's a
mm,
very narrow point of view. And the world is in a very chaotic place right now because far too many men are taking a step back and questioning where they are putting so much of their force, where they're sort of pouring their seed of energy out into the
mm,
world, and where they're whose war they're actually fighting.
mm,
It's like I see all these online conversations and people going to battle, and Republican versus Democrat, and I mean it's just like anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, because I'm realizing that that's a whole other sort of like ball of wax. But the main point is, how are you as a man going to stand in front of another man and tell him that you are making a choice as a free man if you have
mm,
never found yourself in a fucking position of letting go, of being courageous enough to let go of all of the attachments that you have, that have been vying for your masculine
mm,
consciousness, your masculine presence, your energy.
mm.
And this is what we crave. We're terrified of it as men,
Yeah.
because what will we discover if we find ourselves at the precipice of having let go of our beliefs that we were born into, or our
Mm,
patriotism, or our religious beliefs? So we never question them.
mm,
And so in that way we never really find freedom. We never
mm,
really experience what it's like to come into contact with that quality of masculine freedom. And we just go along with the mainstream narrative of like, be the hero, be the good boy, listen to what people are saying about how you should act or behave as a man. And or we rebel against that and we become the bad boy archetype and we call that our masculinity, right?
Yeah.
And so but we never really take a step back from that precipice and really observe the whole thing. And that is what a lot of people are being asked to do. That's what a lot of men are being asked to do. There's a call to masculine maturation that is requiring a lot of us to uncouple from the enmeshment and the codependency that our masculinity has had on these other structures for validation, because for many of us, we need purpose, we need a function as men. And so if something comes along and says, I'll give you a purpose, I'll give you a function, if only you sign on the dotted line, and we're like, oh, thank God, I have a purpose, I have a function, I'll give you my life force, and away we go. And so we just need to reclaim that sense of sovereignty. Men are really being asked to reclaim that sense of sovereignty in a healthy way, not in a way that's in rebellion against something.
Yeah, because that's still in relation to
something. Right, exactly. But to find a real sense of sovereignty, and then from that place, we can decide how we want to move and where we want to contribute and what purpose looks like.
Beautiful. I love it. I think that's going to raise some questions and hopefully invite some inquiry. And I love this, idea as well of sovereignty, but also, masculine maturation. Connor, that is definitely all the time we have. So hopefully we've stimulated some conversation internally for a few people. And if someone wants to actually engage in you in a conversation, where can we find you?
Probably the best place to find me is Instagram. It's just @mantalks. I'm pretty active on there. You can go to my website, mantalks.com or connorbeaton.com. But those are probably the best places to find me. And don't hesitate to send me a DM on Instagram. I try and answer as many of them as I can.
Beautiful. Connor Beaton, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.